and the large red crosses painted on the bottom and both sides of the machine did not deter the enemy. The Viet Minh would train their fire on it all the same. For 5 years, the pilot's survival had depended on constant vigilance, quick reflexes, intelligence, and luck. She did not wish to push that luck and looked again for her escorts. To her relief, the fighter pilots arrived and performed a flyby past her slower-moving helicopter. She admired the fighter pilots and envied the speed of their aircraft. If only the Hiller could go as fast, we could save so many more. She could always count on the Viet Minh hiding in the thick vegetation to follow every move she made and to fire on her whenever they could. The helicopter could be struck and brought down even by light gunfire erupting from the brush. That was why the fighter planes were called into action and sent into the area before the unarmed helicopter would land. The escorting fighter pilots knew what she expected of them. They came in at high speed and low altitude, laying down a merciless pattern of machine gun fire that struck deep into the thick vegetation surrounding the outpost. Today, it was only a strafing run. On other missions, it might be necessary to drop napalm, a flaming jellied gasoline concoction that instantly ignited anything it came in contact with, including human flesh. Their barrage only lasted a minute or so, but it was enough to keep the enemy at bay. With their work finished, the fighters split off to head back to Hanoi. Only the helicopter remained as the pilot sucked in her breath, guiding her machine toward the outpost for a landing. She had already transported 4 other wounded men to Hanoi that day, and fatigue was setting in. Below was the landing zone, crudely marked out with linen sheets and scraps of wood secured by stakes and stones to the ground. She wasted no time. Evacuations at remote outposts were always carried out quickly to avoid cutting power to the engine. It wasn't always a sure bet that the Hiller's engine would start again after a complete shutdown. One thing was sure, however: the Viet Minh would soon regroup. The helicopter's rotor blades slowed as the engine wound down to an idle. The men from the outpost knew not to move until the aircraft was on the ground. The pilot stepped out from the cockpit as a field medic and 2 other soldiers approached in a crouching run, bearing the wounded man on a stretcher. "Bullet in the head," the medic shouted to her above the din of the engine and still swishing rotors. "He's in a coma and been stuffed with Sedol." The wounded man's face was ashen. The medics had wrapped the top of his head in linen gauze. The bandage was already blood-soaked, and his wound continued to seep. She looked the patient over carefully. He was probably not even 20, she surmised. He was one of many Vietnamese now fighting alongside the French against other Vietnamese. This soldier was smaller than a typical Frenchman, but somewhat stocky with broad shoulders. "Could you tie up his hands?" she asked. "I would prefer it." The pilot knew all too well from experience never to underestimate what could happen while moving a wounded patient by air, even one as severely injured as this young Vietnamese soldier. The medic nodded to one of the men bearing the stretcher, and he produced a small length of cord. With the comatose soldier's hands now secured, they began moving the patient toward one of the side-mounted stretchers attached to the helicopter. The extra seconds spent tying the patient's hands further exposed the pilot and soldiers to unseen threats on the ground. No one could shake the sense that enemy eyes and weapons were trained on them. They were all targets, and the threat of weapons fire erupting at any moment was very real. Once the soldiers had positioned the patient beneath the plexiglass fairing enclosing the helicopter's stretcher, the pilot twisted the throttle to rev the helicopter's engine for liftoff. Hanoi was less than half-hour away at full power, but the helicopter's engine always labored in the sweltering tropical atmosphere. It seemed any